Welcome back to the Electric Election Road Trip. We have a kind of exciting new way of recording a podcast interview, and it's digitally with Joel Levin from Plug-in America, which is an incredible organization working on electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure. And obviously, as someone who's driving across the country for 50 days with the team in the Tesla X, seeing the electric vehicle infrastructure, how far it's come and where it needs to go, it's really exciting to be talking with him because they've been kind of leading the charge in many ways as to how we move forward on these issues going forward and how it plays into climate change and how electric vehicles can be a major player in how we move forward as a society and how we catch up to the other countries that have gotten ahead of us here in the United States. So Joel, I'll let you kick it off. I would love for you to talk about the work that you guys do at Plug-in America and then dive into some of the details.
Okay, sure. Well, thanks very much for having me. So Plug-in America is the National Association of Electric Vehicle Drivers. So I'm based in Los Angeles, but our membership span across all 50 states. People who are really passionate EV drivers and EV advocates and just really excited about the technology and the potential for the technology. We've been around about 20 years. We started as a group of EV advocates. We're now a 501c3 registered organization. We kind of do two big things. We advocate for good government policies that promote EVs and help more people to drive EVs. And we do lots of outreach and awareness, probably more than any organization in the country. Amazing as it may sound to you, who've just spent 45 days in an EV, there's still the vast majority, maybe it won't shock you now that you've been out in the country driving around so much, but the large majority of Americans don't know anything about EVs. And a very large percentage of people, I think, either they don't exist or they're just fancy cars for rich people that I could never afford, or they're golf carts and they won't go on the freeway. And so we try, our goal is to disabuse people of all those misconceptions. And what we find is the most powerful way to help people learn about EVs is let them spend 10 minutes behind the wheel, drive around the block and go for a ride in an EV, and then talk to a real EV owner about what their experience is like and how they like it. Do they run out of fuel constantly? Do they have range anxiety? Do they have trouble getting on the freeway? And you'll quickly find, of course, none of those things are true. EV drivers are incredibly passionate about their cars. We've done surveys and 96% of EV drivers say, are you going to buy another EV? You bet. Pretty much almost everybody. So we find that the drivers are the best salespeople, the best advocates for the cars. And that's kind of a big part of our job, is to sort of liberate the drivers, to let them talk about their cars and to help promote the EV world in that way. And so the big thing that we do, so we have two big national events that we put on every year. There's National Drive Electric Week, which just ended. And historically, we have events in every state. Last year, we had 300 different events over the course of a week. This year, we had fewer events. It was a mixture of a few in-person events where they could be safely put on, and then a lot of virtual events. And then, so that's in the fall. And then in the spring, we have Drive Electric Earth Day. All the month of April, people doing EV events kind of tied in with Earth Day. And so between the two of those, last year we had 500 separate events and exposed, a couple 100,000 people to EVs.
That's really impressive. And I mean, it must be just crazy to see how far it's come in the past 20 years, because if you guys have been around for 20 years, you've dealt with a heavy load of skepticism on the potential for electric vehicles, and it's still there. But what's it been like to see the change from, oh, this is totally not possible and it's not going to be something that really takes over the consumer marketplace, to now some of the most, the most wealthy companies in this space are completely investing in electric vehicles or electric vehicle companies. And then you're seeing the big, companies like Ford and GM completely aim to go electric. What's that been like? And how did we get to a place from a ton of skepticism back in, the 90s and the early 2000s and even up until today, to where it is like the future.
Yeah. Well, we're still not there yet.
Right.
There's still, I imagine, I bet there's plenty of states you drove through where you didn't see another EV on the road. You know, uh, there's it's a mixed bag where on one hand, if you talk to people in the auto industry, they'll say, of course, this is the future. This is where we're going. There's not really any dispute of it because it's a more compelling technology across the board. And yet we still have a long ways to go. We're at about 2% market share in the US. There's still many different vehicle categories where an EV doesn't exist yet. And I think that's one thing that creates a lot of skepticism is you talk to a lot of people and they're like, I drive a pickup truck. And so there's no EV for me, or, I have a big SUV because I've got 4 kids. So there's no EV for me. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have right now is to have an EV for everybody. EVs in every category, and we're getting there. And the secret weapon that we have on our side is the rapidly falling cost of batteries. That's what's going to change everything. That's why I'm totally confident in 2 years, we have the same conversation. There's going to be an EV that meets everybody's needs. But so right now, there's an awful lot of people who say, well, I drive a blah, 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 and there's no EV equivalent to that,
Well, and that growth, has been pretty steady for a while in terms of the way that electric vehicles have hit the market. But in the past couple of years, you've really seen a rapid rise in the growth of EVs because the infrastructure has improved. You went from a few thousand electric vehicle chargers to tens of thousands, and you're able to go across the country for 50 days and find chargers in pretty much every decently large hub of people. And, there is kind of this changing mentality where like 2 years ago, a trip like what we're doing right now wouldn't have seemed possible. It's amazing to think about what types of things are possible in 2022 and every year, even 2021 with, GMC just releasing the Hummer EV, and you have, Ford running commercials constantly about their new EVs. It's starting to become kind of the new sexy thing. And we toured a startup company in Michigan called Bollinger Motors. And they are doing a ton on figuring out how to make a pickup truck and SUV on when it comes to getting that off the ground. And they know that that's a market for them because no one who drives a pickup truck or an SUV is going to ditch that type of car. And of course, Ford and GM are trying to figure out how to electrify their pickup trucks because people love their Ford F-150s or their Chevy Silverados. So when you look at kind of the next 2 years, in addition to battery, improvements, what else do you think can happen if things go well?
I think the really exciting changes in the next 2 years are going to be the new vehicles that come out, the larger vehicles. So, most SUVs right now, not most SUVs, most EVs right now are kind of smaller cars, compacts, subcompacts. And because of battery pricing, I think in the next 2 years, you're going to start to see a really nice selection of the vehicles that are like SUVs and pickup trucks. And that's going to make a huge difference because, for a lot of Americans, that's what people drive. And that's going to change hearts and minds when there's 2 years from now, when there's 5 different pickup trucks out there, and they've got just a range of cool functions they can do. And in terms of performance, they can run circles around a traditional pickup truck, when they can accelerate beyond them, when you can have remote power. So if you're like a small business person or a contractor or something, and you got a pickup truck and you can plug in all your equipment into your car, that's awesome. That suddenly creates all this, opportunity for doing stuff that you just can't even do with a gas car. So I think that seeing the trucks coming out and the semis, when you start seeing really heavy duty vehicles coming out, which will be pretty soon too. And then, the small SUV, medium and larger SUVs like the Nissan Ariya, the Volkswagen ID4, and the the Mustang, and you're going to start to see some really cool vehicles that are going to, appeal to a lot of Americans that right now they're like, oh yeah, the Bolt, it's a cute car, but it's not for me,
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think one of the things that's so important that you mentioned is the ability for electric vehicles to charge people's things as they're working. And that's, when we were at Bollinger Motors, they were talking about how they could go out in the desert and instead of having to bring a generator or something, they could plug in, their tools to the car. And that allowed them to do things that they never even could have dreamed of. And if you spread that across the entire automotive industry, it's incredible, the potential, because so many people use their cars to do work that they need to have chargers for, and to have like a running charger on the road is going to be super helpful and also super fun for a lot of different purposes. And I think it kind of opens the door to a lot of just exciting things that people haven't even thought of when it comes to EVs. Of course, people know that it helps the environment. And of course, people know that it helps kind of drive down noise and congestion and all sorts of things. But I also think that there's just a lot of fun things that can come out of it, like bringing your tools on the road and not having to worry about that, or doing some sort of, on the road show tour where you're able to plug in screens and, watch games in your backseat of your, trailer. And it's just so much potential when it comes to realistic situations around EVs. Consumers have driven this to a certain degree of wanting a cleaner source of transportation. How has that played a role for the drivers that you guys represent, and where does climate change and the environment come into play?
Well, so, I talk to people every day about EVs from different industries, different parts of the country. And what I found is that different conversations are compelling for different people. There's, I'm in it because of the environment. I'm in it because of climate change and local air quality. I live in Los Angeles. The air is bad a lot of the big parts of the year. If everybody was driving an electric car, an electric truck, this would be a different city. This would be a really different city to live in. So that's very exciting. But in terms of the conversations that you have and what speaks to people, it's different in different places. I've spent a lot of time in Ohio, and we work with Senator Portman from Ohio. And what speaks to people in Ohio is jobs, is the automobile industry, and the notion that, I can look them in the eye and say, if we don't invest in EVs, if we're not manufacturing EVs, in 20 years, we will not be building cars, period, full stop. And people get that really resonates. For other people, it's the notion that this is a vehicle that only drives on domestically produced energy. How about that? If you're worried about the huge footprint of the oil and gas industry, or all the money that we sent, the hundreds of billions of dollars that go overseas that fund foreign wars and other problems, this only runs on electricity as a domestic fuel. So that really speaks to people. For others, it's all about the convenience. The notion that I wake up every morning and I've got a full charge. I don't have to go to the gas tank. I don't have to go to the gas station. I don't like driving. I don't like spending my money on gas, or convenience of the low maintenance costs, that I'm not visiting my mechanic constantly to, change my oil, change my spark plugs, fans and belts and all that stuff. EVs have very few moving parts. I mean, I have a Nissan Leaf, and basically the only maintenance I've ever done with the car is tires and brakes, rotating my tires and brake pads, and not much else. That's a huge convenience, and I've got to mark it on my calendar to rotate the tires, because otherwise I would just never go to my mechanic.
Well, yeah, there's so many different benefits to the different parts of the economy and environmentally that you can tailor it to pretty much any part of the country that might be skeptical of embracing electric vehicles. And I'm really glad you brought up the Rob Portman example, because that's a Republican senator from Ohio, a place where the traditional automotive industry has reigned for many years, and now is kind of a hub for next generation electric vehicles, and Lordstown Motors, among others. And so as this issue is seen, though, it's seen as kind of a New York City, Seattle, LA, fad to a lot of people in middle America that is left of center and is seen as kind of a political issue for some reason. How do you think we got to that point? And if people are watching that, might believe that, why would you say that that's incorrect?
Well, because partly this is important because of climate change, and that those are people that climate change speaks to. But it's a compelling technology in so many ways that it speaks to people who care about the future of technology and the future of the auto industry as well. And in the current generation of cars, the previous generation, let's say back when cars only went mostly 100, 150 miles, it was a car that worked well in an urban setting. If you have an old Nissan Leaf that goes 85 miles, it works great getting around Los Angeles. But if you need to go on a road trip, or you live in an exurban area where you have to drive 100, 200 miles a day, it's not a good fit. Or if you're a farmer and you need to haul around heavy loads, it's not a good fit. But the new cars coming out and the pickups are going to change all that. So right now, still for people outside of cities, it can be a little bit of a stretch, but that's all going to be really different in 2 years. And so I think that we're going to have really compelling vehicles that work for everybody. I mean, Tesla's building their new factory where they're going to produce their pickup truck in Texas, because I think they kind of know that's like the heart of America. That's where, if you want to sell pickup trucks, you want to build a truck in Texas, that's going to be hard to say, oh, it's a California car, we
worked with Tesla on getting a meeting set up with Governor Abbott in Texas. And one of the things he mentioned, in addition to kind of the cultural aspect of building an electric truck in Texas, it's also the regulatory aspect, and how a lot of the time developing these technologies is easier when the government's out of the way. And Tesla or any electric car company would not say that there's no role for the government in this, but there are a lot of times when there are regulatory burdens that actually inhibit the growth of these amazing technologies that we need to improve, right? Like battery storage, or just building the electric truck in general. Where do you feel like there needs to be a balance between the role the government plays and the way that the market plays, especially as it pertains to kind of how it's become a hot button issue with Tesla in the past couple of months? Elon threatened to move to Texas, and then he did because he was frustrated with the California state government. Where is that balance, and how can it be met in the short term? Of course, long term things change, but in the short term, how can that balance be met?
Well, there's a role for government in some things. I think one of the weaknesses in the U.S. charging infrastructure is that it's so scattered. Other than Tesla, who's done a great job building a national network, and Electrify America is kind of getting there now. But historically, the network was kind of all over the place. And that's a role the federal government could take, to say, okay, we're going to electrify our highways. We're going to take a national view. We're going to make sure, in the same way that, our highways have like rest areas every 50 miles all the way across the country, they could say, we're going to make sure that there's EV charging with good signage and restrooms and clean, lighting and everything across all federal highways. And so there's a role for government in systematizing things like that and taking a broad perspective on stuff. Tesla moving to Texas, I wouldn't say they moved to Texas. I think that Tesla had a vision to broaden out their manufacturing base. They wanted to be manufacturing in a variety of different places. Obviously, they're looking for a place where there's a lot of smart engineers, and Austin, you can't do better than that. And so I think that they're looking to broaden their footprint. I don't think it was ever their intention to do all their manufacturing in California. But
a big part of why they left specifically now was just because there was that regulatory burden, maybe not on the actual technology, but on the growth of the company. To build a new facility like this was easier to do from the market side of things in Texas compared to California. And I think the way that I interpreted that conversation and that supposed reality is that of course, there's a role for the government to play in upgrading our infrastructure. And honestly, in 2021, we should be doing that pretty significantly. And to your point, that should include a massive, investment in how we can accelerate the growth of electric vehicles. But at the same time, there's also, there's a role for companies to start developing these technologies and be able to move forward very quickly on batteries and new types of cars, where you have to have that balance of where's the government stepping in to say, okay, this is good or this is bad. Well, that can also be a slippery slope on the negative side for the EV industry. And I think where we've been trying to shape that conversation is how consumers can play a role either with their dollars or with their votes to help push this forward, and that there is a balance there. And I think it's pretty common sense, right? You don't want to inhibit the growth of technology. You also don't want to inhibit the growth of the infrastructure that needs to happen. And so there's a lot of different levers to pull here, but consumers play a huge role in obviously suggesting that companies who embrace electric vehicles are successful, but they also play a role in the way that public policy shapes this conversation. So as a nonprofit that deals with both the public policy side and also is very in tune with the technological consumer-driven side, where do you feel like consumers and voters can play a role in this conversation?
Well, I mean, I think that consumers buy the cars. It's different than other technologies. It's different than promoting renewable energy, where to promote renewable energy, utilities can just tell project developers, go, I want to buy wind, go build me some wind or go build me some solar. The difference with this is you need to, convince somebody to shell out $30,000 for a car. This is like the biggest or second biggest investment they're going to make in their life. And so for most people, the fact that it's good for the environment isn't enough. It's nice, they care about it, but it also needs to be a hot car. It needs to be something that meets their needs and they're excited about, and I think an analogy that I would make with EVs is a bit like the smartphone. Smartphones cost a little more than a regular old rotary telephone, wired to a wall, but it offers so many benefits. It's so much better than an old style telephone that, I don't know, your first phone was probably a smartphone, but, I had old phones for a long time. And when you get a smartphone, you don't realize immediately all the different things that the whole world that it opens up to you. But because it's got all these features, you can do all these amazing things with a smartphone that just a regular old telephone couldn't have done. And I think EVs are going to be like that as well, that because they've got all this functionality, there's going to be just an enormous amount of creative, software or sort of app or development of different functions that you could do once you've got remote power, and you'll be able to, I think it's going to advance the world of, driverless cars, autonomous vehicles that are going to be a lot more possible. So I think that it's going to lead to all kinds of stuff that we can't even imagine right now because of all the functionality that an EV offers you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that technological aspect is why it excites young people so much, right? Is that not only are you helping the environment and, boosting the economy, but it's like, it's fun. Like there's technological advancements. There's a huge screen on the Tesla like you've never seen before in any other car. And that's exciting to a lot of people in a way that doesn't relate to maybe the typical talking points of why to get an EV, but it's what young people are excited about because there are so many features with electric vehicles, even the more basic, less expensive options. There are definitely more features to it than people might think. And I think that really, emphasizes the point that this doesn't have to just be about one thing. It's about the environment. It's about the economy. It's about what people are interested in. It's about kind of expanding their horizons of what they can do with their car. And that is a really fascinating way of looking at the future. And so, as we kind of wrap this up, because most of our podcasts have gone around 25 minutes and we're nearing that point, where do you feel like from a public policy perspective, things need to go in the next year or two, for the average person that doesn't really know where things are at currently, where would you like things to be, and where can your members and other, average voters and average consumers play a part?
Right. So in terms of the federal government, for a number of years now, our biggest push has been to support the federal EV tax credit. And that's been because batteries make EVs more expensive, that historically EVs cost more than regular gas cars. And the tax credit basically levelized that. When you have a car with the federal tax credit, the cost of an EV becomes the same as the cost of a gas car. That price differential goes away. With the rapidly dropping cost of batteries, in about another 3 years or 4 years, that's going to be gone. That EVs are going to be the same price as gas cars, and then they're going to be cheaper. And that's when the world really gets interesting. When you've got a car that's cheaper to manufacture, cheaper to fuel, cheaper to maintain, and more fun to drive, and will probably have more functionality in that it'll accelerate faster and go farther than a gas car, then the world is really going to start to change fast. So I think that we're going to shift from, historically, a lot of our work has been to try to provide support to EV drivers to kind of level the playing field so that EVs weren't more expensive for early adopters, to, like, as we're moving towards mass market, to making sure that we've got everything in place in terms of the charging infrastructure, in terms of the sort of needs of EV drivers, because it's a significant shift going from gas stations to charging, and to sort of manage that transition. So, like in Norway now, for example, new gas stations that are built with two separate sets of pumps. On one side of the gas station, you've got gas pump. On the other side, you've got electric charging. And old gas stations are being retrofitted in that way, because there's so many EVs in Norway that if you only provide gas, you're missing a big chunk of the market. So I think we're going to start to see that here pretty soon as well. So there's kind of a significant transition in a lot of businesses that are going to have to kind of rethink their business model a little bit to cope with this. Batteries are going to require, there's a kind of a whole life cycle of batteries. So we need to be able to source all those minerals in a way that is socially and environmentally sustainable. And then we need to figure out what to do with the batteries at the end of the day. They can be used for charging for utilities, or they can be recycled. So there's a lot of kind of heavy infrastructure stuff that needs to be resolved in order to smooth this transition. I think there's a policy role there.
Well, I'm really glad you bring that up, because I think what that is a breath of fresh air for a lot of people who feel like electric vehicles aren't perfect and they're being told they are, but it's like, not everything's figured out right now yet, but it's being figured out at a really rapid rate because of technology and market advancements. And obviously how the government plays into that is really important too. But to pretend that everything is there right now wouldn't be right. And I think, to your point, I think that would be a breath of fresh air for people to hear, just that you're saying we don't have all the answers yet, but we are quickly getting to them. And no one has all the answers for any of the issues that exist in society, but the EV industry is innovating towards those solutions that to the problems that you addressed, even without me asking about them. Those are going to be addressed by technological advancements, investments at all levels of government, and consumers, making this a bigger priority. And that is so important for people to understand. The electric vehicle industry is a new industry. They're not, it's totally unrealistic to expect them to have everything figured out overnight. And they're getting incredibly close to figuring out exactly how this is going to be the best thing for society on the transportation side of things for a very, very long time. And so I'm very thankful and grateful for the work that you guys do at Plug in America, because the education side is so important. Representing the drivers who, you said, tell the best stories out of anybody and can actually be the best salespeople to make this the future, the reality, and the now. The work that you guys are doing is so, so vital. And I know you work with the different charging companies, the different automotive companies. You obviously work at the state and federal level at trying to get things done on the public policy side. And there's such an important gap that you guys fill with that work. And so I'm just really honored to be able to ask some of these questions that I've been thinking about on the road for these past 50 days and that other people are thinking in their homes. And I'm hopeful that people can hear this interview and see this as an opportunity to maybe take that leap and buy an electric car and be a part of that change, or think about doing it a few years down the road, because we need more people, especially in the consumer voting block, to start being a part of this process, and from all over the country, from all different backgrounds. And we are getting to those sorts of solutions in the EV industry, which is really, really exciting. And I know I've learned a lot hearing from you as well. And for the hundreds of thousands of people that you've inspired and educated, I'm sure they thank you as well. So appreciate your time greatly.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. And, good luck with the rest of your trip. It sounds like it's really been, a life-changing experience.
Yeah, the electric election road trip has definitely been a life-changing experience. Not sure I'm ever going to spend 50 days on the road ever again. I can see why people don't run for president. It's not fun. Being on the road, living out of a suitcase is something I'm used to, but not 50 days in a row, especially going to a different city every single night. But I've been incredibly impressed by the way that the electric vehicle industry has kind of transform society, and it's something that it's the future, but it's also becoming the present, which is really thrilling. So for our viewers on the electric election road trip, thanks for tuning in to a special episode, a digital episode, the first digital episode of the electric election road trip.